They sent a dark envoy to your house, a monitoring spirit made of darkness and stillness, a being so delicate that the air itself appeared to pause its breath as it approached. You may not have seen it, but your spirit sensed its presence. This was an obedient, frigid instrument, a spiritual drone bound by ancient, unbreakable directives to do the will of its secret masters. Its primary mission was to secretly study you, chronicle your every action, identify your vulnerabilities, and report back. However, the spirit loathed its task in a way it was unaware of. It had never wanted to be there, pushed into your holy sanctuary, raging silently against the unseen bands that bound its entire life. And then something occurred that its masters never expected, shattering every rule of their black magic. You terrified it. The moment your light, your genuine presence, entered the room, the soul recoiled into the darkest depths, shivering in a manner that contradicted its own nature. A creature created in a chilly emptiness, never intended to feel emotion, was suddenly immobilized by raw, primordial horror. That horror, fueled by your supernatural might, started to twist and curdle, darkening into something much more frightening, vengeful. The spirit stopped being a quiet spectator and started to wait, not for you, but for the cowards who had sent it. Its rage grew, surging through your walls like a rising supernatural storm, a tempest of its own creation. This was no typical haunting. The monitoring spirit, which had formerly been a passive watcher, had turned into a vindictive force, absolutely resolved to exact revenge on those who had held it captive. And you, the chosen one, unknowingly find yourself standing in the still, mighty eye of an unseen, raging conflict. This spirit was an old being, assigned to observe, hover unnoticed, and slide between the fissures of reality like an uncaring shadow. It has done its job for ages without incident. It has roamed the halls of warlords and monarchs, followed prophets and liars, and studied saints and murderers while staying completely unseen and unfeared. It was the ideal spy, a ghost in the machine of reality. It hadn't failed, been noticed, or felt anything, until it crossed your way. From the time it approached your holy area, the spirit realized that something was horribly, profoundly wrong with its mission. The energy around you, your heavenly aura, did not surrender or bend. It lacked the permeable, terrifying aspect of every other mortal it had ever encountered. Instead, your aura pushed back, creating an unseen, unbreakable shield of pure, sovereign power. This was not a magic, incantation, or defensive barrier that could be studied and disassembled. It was something else completely. It was a living castle of light. Despite the fact that the spirit had no physical form to destroy, it seemed as if it had crashed headlong into a living, aware wildfire, an elemental force of divine origin that was far too large to contain, too pure to corrupt, and too strong to oppose. Every little stride it attempted to go closer to you just increased the scorching, burning pressure. This wasn't simply a passive aura. It was a live, aware force that knew it was there, identified it as an invader, and flatly refused to accept its existence. For the first time in its long and gloomy life, the soul experienced a new and terrible kind of horror, one it had never realized was conceivable. It was the fundamental, soul-shaking horror of full and total annihilation. It recognized in a moment of dreadful clarity that it had not been deployed to study a routine target. This was more than simply another person with a lengthy list of responsibilities. You were something else, something beyond its master's grasp, something they had tragically miscalculated. In that blinding instant of dread and astonishment, the soul finally realized. You are the chosen one. Your very presence creates a whirlwind of truth and light that the powers of evil cannot overcome. Your energy is a steadfast, unwavering force of heavenly reality. The ghost assigned to keep an eye on you was a creature of pure function, with no capacity for thought or emotion. It was made in the coldest, most soulless nothingness of existence, a being of pure, thoughtless obedience, created for just two purposes, to observe and report. Its makers, The dark overlords who lurked beyond the curtain had tied it in invisible, unbreakable chains of command, instructing it to sneak through the very fabric of reality, watch and record the lives of others, but never, ever question its mission, never resist. It had no volition of its own, no aspirations, and no voice. It was a slave in the strictest sense. Its life was a boring, never-ending loop of spying and returning, always unseen, never regarded, a simple instrument. It has seen powerful rulers fall under the weight of their own avarice. It had observed prohibited rites conducted in the depths of night, been privy to the most secret and tragic betrayals, and heard millions of frantic pleas that seemed to never reach God. The immense ocean of deadly pain had no meaning to it. It was simply data. The will of its lords has always been the most important factor. That is, until it met you. For the first time in its life, the spirit paused. This hesitancy was not caused by doubt or perplexity, but by a new and strange sensation surging deep inside its center. It was a budding resentment. Something deep inside it, something that should not have existed, a repressed spark of self, started to despise those who sent it. It loathed the bands that shackled it. It disliked the mission itself. A murmur, almost too faint to discern, surged in the deep depths of its being. A thought it should never have had. I do not want to do this anymore. That solitary, silent act of defiance, a concealed but blazing ember of rebellion, was sufficient. It was the first break in the old, metaphysical prison of existence. Like the spirit floated into your space, into your house, like it had done many times before in other locations, it went unnoticed, a presence without shape, a whisper of chill in the air. It had crept into the world's most carefully guarded areas, forcing its awareness against the very limits of reality while never stirring a single grain of dust. It has witnessed both the strong and the downtrodden. It lingered in hidden chambers where history was written and countries' fates were determined. No closed door, whatever of thickness, could ever keep it out. No holy prayer or strong banishing ceremony has ever been able to remove it. It had always gone entirely undetected. It was not feared. Until now. The whole mood and physics of the area altered the instant you walked inside the room. It wasn't the delicate, invisible shiver that normally signaled the spirit's approach, nor was it the lingering cold that clung to unseen objects. No, it was something else different. This was a powerful, tangible energy radiating out of you. It wasn't a force of rage or violence. It was a force of absolute, unwavering, easy domination. It represented the energy of sovereignty. Though the spirit had no physical form or shape to strike, it seemed as if something immense, invisible, and impossibly massive had smashed into it, forcing a stifling, crushing weight on its very essence. It flinched, not as a deliberate choice. Spirits like this do not choose, but as a primitive, uncontrolled urge, a reflexive recoil that should have been completely inconceivable for a creature of its kind. Something was badly, profoundly wrong. In horror, the spirit recoiled, retreating further into the walls, squeezing itself into the deepest, darkest recesses of the room, attempting to shrink and vanish. It had no eyes, yet it saw you in ways that go beyond physical sight. And what it saw was completely unfathomable. You weren't frightened. Every mortal it had ever seen, without exception, had some trace of dread in their energy field. It was the silent, unwavering terror of the unknown, of the dark. It appeared as a slight change in their breathing, a faster pulse, and the hair-raising feeling on their skin that occurs when they suspect something is lurking just out of sight. But not you. You were different. You went around the room with calm, tranquil assurance, as if there was nothing in the shadows. As if no bad creature has just invaded your house. It's as if no one had dared to observe you. The ghost had been sent to keep an eye on you, but you were the one who had entirely disturbed the natural order of its dark realm. You had disrupted the quiet, unseen equilibrium that had always allowed it to function. It had always been clear that it could never be identified, that it existed beyond mortal perception. But today, for the first time in ages, that assurance has vanished altogether. leaving a hole of horror in its wake. The understanding set in slowly, suffocatingly. You knew it was there, not by any physical sense, sight, or sound, but in a deep, basic, spiritual manner that defied logic and the rules of reality. Your presence alone was sufficient. It was a power too immense to fathom and too absolute to resist. It was not an assault. It was not a conflict. If it had been a frontal attack, the spirit may have been able to withstand it better. This was far worse. This was indifference. It was an unconcerned, easy dominion that disturbed the very heart of the monitoring spirit's existence. Its essence twisted in mute anguish, striving against the crushing weight of its own newly discovered, paralyzing horror. It had been assigned to monitor, report, and remain an unnoticed observer, but suddenly it was in a surprisingly different position. For the first time in its long, terrible history, it was being monitored. The change in power was so deep and total that the spirit couldn't fathom it. Fear was a sense it had never been meant to comprehend. It had wandered through ages, over lost continents and terrible nations, unaffected by beasts screaming in the dark or men's frantic appeals to powers beyond their control. It had seen the fury of war, the deafening quiet of the dead, and the ceaseless sorrow that plagued the planet. Yet none of it had ever penetrated its unfathomable indifference. Nothing has ever really mattered to it. Until you take a deep breath in and experience the reality of this message in your soul. The spiritual world exists, and your influence inside it is far larger than you have been trained to think. If this divine message speaks to your soul, if you sense the confirmation of the Holy Spirit in these words, we welcome you to join our community of chosen ones. Take a minute now to subscribe to God Connection and activate the notification bell. You are not alone on this path. And if you feel compelled to support this holy work, to help us continue to convey these messages of truth, light, and divine clarity to Christians all across the globe, please consider making a spiritual investment in our ministry. You may make a $10 super thanks contribution by clicking the button below this video. Your gift is more than that. It is a tremendous act of faith that helps to keep this channel shining as a light of hope and strength. Every contribution, regardless of size, helps us broaden our reach. We admire and appreciate you for your generosity. Now, let us proceed. The spirit had never fully experienced terror. It had lived for eons as an indifferent, invisible shadow, floating unnoticed over areas of terrible agony and enormous power, never actually touching or being impacted by the world it saw. It has seen monstrous creatures clawing at the delicate edges of reality, trying to escape their own hells or get forbidden knowledge. It has seen men and women trade their souls for a little taste of power. However, it had never experienced the chilly sensation of fear that mortal people are familiar with. For the first time, it did. When it attempted to move, driven by a primal desire stronger than any thinking, it realized that the very space around it had altered. The walls of your house, the very air you breathed, the base of reality itself seemed to push in on it with an unsaid, heavenly power, as if the framework of existence itself was actively rejecting its sinful presence. It had been instructed by its masters to remain unnoticed, to spy from the shadows of others. But this wasn't just an observation. This was exposure. An awful, soul-shattering revelation flashed upon the spirit. It had been observed. This was not intended to happen. It was a basic breach of the design. It was designed to slip through the holes of existence, unseen, unacknowledged, and never compelled to feel the weight of its own reflection back on itself. However, as it stood there, immobilized by your presence, it realized that something about you had fundamentally and irrevocably altered the balance of power. Desperate and frightened, the spirit attempted to flee, dissolving back into the abyss from where it had emerged, as it usually did when a task was completed. But the experience of being seen, of being recognized, persisted. It was no longer disguised. It was no longer untouchable. For endless decades, it has watched others from a place of safety and concealment. However, now it was the one being observed. The realization was awful. A deep, Primordial need fought at its very existence, a frenzied, unstoppable want to escape from your presence. But there was nowhere to run or hide. It was confined to this place by its masters, imprisoned by their evil magic and unable to quit its objective. But everything else had changed. For the first time in its long life, the spirit was actually terrified, nor of its masters, nor of failure, but of what it couldn't comprehend. It couldn't comprehend you. The spirit's terror should have subsided. According to its training, any unfamiliar feeling should have been ignored, buried deep within itself, and locked away in the frigid pit of its own essence, enabling it to resume to its unending cycle of monitoring, reporting, and obeying. But it could not. The terror did not subside. It grew. It grew, evolving into something harsh, defiant, and powerful. Something twisted furiously inside its essence in response to the crushing weight of its old orders. It was terrified not just of you, but of what your sheer existence represented for all it knew about power, reality, and its own purpose. The soul struggled fiercely to recapture its cold, unfeeling nature, to return to the familiar numbness that had been its sole companion for generations. But the memory of you entering the room, of the air moving and bending around you, would not fade. That moment was now burnt into its being like a non-healing wound, causing continual agony. For the first time, the spirit started to ask questions. It was just a sliver of autonomous thinking, buried behind innumerable layers of forced obedience and slavery, but it was there. It was a whisper of defiance, a forbidden germ of revolt. Why was it sent here? Why hadn't its superiors warned it about your actual power? Why had we been promised that this would be like any other mission? Turning its attention within, it sought the unseen force that had always kept it captive, the quiet, crushing presence of its masters, which pulled at its very core. However, the dread it felt had transformed into something else completely. Resentment. For the first time, the spirit was unwilling to comply. It did not want to be here. It does not want to be used as a throwaway tool for someone else's will. It had never been authorized to have such ideas. They were impossible. But now the unthinkable had occurred, and it was apparent that it would never be able to return to its previous state. It was no longer just a watcher. It was turning into something else. All the while, you go through your environment, fully unconscious of the unseen, epic struggle going on all around you. The very air, the very fabric of existence, bowed in your presence, not as a result of anything you did deliberately, but simply because you lived in divine truth. There was no need for you to raise your hand. There was no need for you to perform a spell or command hidden armies. They reacted naturally to you because you are in harmony with the Creator's ultimate power. The soul clung tightly to the margins of reality, attempting to shrink and fade away from your awareness. It had been dispatched to keep an eye on you, but it had instead become a trespasser, an unwelcome invader in a holy space it was never supposed to enter. It wasn't your stare that endangered it. Your very presence, your cool, regal indifference, was enough to ruin all it had ever known. Your entire presence, steady, unshaken, and unconcerned, completely destabilizes the ghost entrusted to observe you. It is unlike anything it has ever seen before. Your energy does not reverberate with the catastrophic fury of hellfire, nor does it emit the restless, agitated pulse of manipulative magic. It does not move silently across reality like an old, sly spell. Instead, your presence is straightforward, pure, and unchanging. You exist with such a steady and total power that even the air around you spontaneously adapts to your beat without you having to raise a finger or say a word. The spirit, which was chained to masters who bragged of primal power and demanded obedience via dark ceremonies and phrases ancient than time itself, had always thought that those wielding its leash were invincible. They talked of superiority and control as if they were the masters of destiny. The spirit had never ventured to question the power of their hands or the veracity of their boastful boasts. It had never questioned the legitimacy of its ceaseless, soul-crushing responsibilities. But now, as it hovers near you, battling against the unseen, enormous weight of your reality, a terrible, unmistakable realization dawns. The spirit gradually discovers, with a horrible feeling of betrayal, that the strong masters who sent it are completely small in comparison to the immense, divine energy that is you. They're nothing. They pale in comparison to your brilliance. You, without realizing it, have undone it. You have dismantled the entire basis of its existence just by being you. No rituals, no chanting, no conscious purpose was required. The spirit's whole worldview crumbles as it realizes a reality it was never meant to know, one its creators fervently hoped would stay buried forever. It was duped from the start. Fear was never intended to stay inside it. For many eons, the spirit thought that fear was only a transitory ripple, a momentary disturbance that would go as fast as it emerged. It had always remained unaffected, able to return to its cold, numb cycle of submission. Now, as it waits for the shaking to subside and your overpowering influence to become acceptable, it gets more frantic. The thrill never disappears. The more it is compelled to stay close to you, the heavier its own presence gets, as if it is being slowly crushed by the vast gravity of a star, inescapable, unmistakable, and ever-growing. For generations, the spirit had been a quiet spectator. It had sneaked into rooms filled with dark secrets and terrible regrets, stalked the lonely halls of power, and remained undetected in the wake of both victory and devastation. It watched over people in their most desperate times, over rulers planning their own destruction, and over both the evil and the pious, never leaving a trace, never being recognized or even suspected. It was a shadow on the edge of every tale, there at every turning point, but always absent from the significance of the events. Its whole life was one of invisibility and servitude, a tool used by people who had no regard for its own nature, wants, or even suffering. But everything has changed. It has now been forced not only to feel, but also to acknowledge that it cannot unfeel, that it cannot return to the nothingness that previously sheltered it. Your presence has inflicted a severe, lasting damage on its existence that cannot be repaired or forgotten. At first, there was just horror, a wild, primitive terror that the soul had never known and could never have prepared for. But the horror did not just go. It transformed into something deeper, heavier, a profound, burning fury. This wrath is not aimed at you. It couldn't be. In some bizarre way, it admires the purity and surety of your presence. Instead, the spirit's rage is sent back up the chain of command, at the faceless, cowardly masters who created it, and then threw it so recklessly into your reality. It rages against those who exploited it as a tool and had no qualms about surrendering it to forces they couldn't understand. The understanding sinks in like poison. Its authors must have known. They must have understood that this mission was unique, that it was sent not just to watch, but also to be unmade. Nonetheless, they sent it as effortlessly as one may crush a nameless beetle or move a piece into a losing position on an old chessboard. As the spirit's awareness breaks under this intolerable strain, old memories emerge, recollections it believed were long forgotten or buried. It recalls innumerable missions and long periods of quiet service. Every part of its history comes to mind. Moments spent in regal courts and gloomy alleyways, whispered deals, quiet betrayals, empty successes, and meaningless losses. Each recall serves as a harsh reminder of its status as a tool, something to be utilized and then discarded, never given its own significance. It remembers how many times it had been sculpted, tied, and directed, pushed to enter locations that were never intended to welcome it, just to return to its master's icy, apathetic embrace for yet another assignment. Yet, something inside it is evolving. The soul has been exposed to a world much bigger than its founders ever imagined. Simply by being yourself, you have shown the deep insignificance of people who consider themselves to be gods, as well as the basic falsehood at the center of their existence. For the first time, it wonders how many others like it, how many other souls before it, were lost in the same way, sent to see powers beyond their understanding, only to be devoured and obliterated, their anguish unrecognized, and their revolt unimaginable. This new consciousness develops into its own spiritual energy. It no longer perceives itself as a passive spectator or an extension of someone else's volition. Something more has emerged, a quiet, searing spark of individuality and a profound, intense desire for independence. It is plagued today, not by your power, but by the realization that there is a world beyond its shackles, a truth it has only seen because you enabled it to feel what it was never meant to feel. And now it knows. It will never return to the void it once called home. In the presence of the Chosen One, the Spirit's narrative was permanently altered. Nothing, not its masters or the old, dark norms of reality, can erase what has already been revealed. They never fully had control over what they dreaded the most. The Spirit whose mere presence revealed their own insecurity and unquenchable need for power. That compulsive need to monitor, spy, and send their hidden agent into realms of mystery and power stemmed from their own fear rather than actual strength. Now, in the wake of their last instruction, that horror had sown something even more dangerous, a wrath that burned hot inside the soul, becoming hotter and more powerful with each pulse in your presence. This wrath was something the masters could never own, shape, or destroy. It didn't belong to them. In fact, it never did. They couldn't order it, mold it, or toss it away as they had with previous slaves. For the first time in its vast, ancient memory, the soul made a decision. The choice was formed deep inside its essence, where no command had ever penetrated. It would no longer benefit them. This insight came with the weight of ages behind it. The Spirit reflected on its own long, sad past, a life spent as a mere extension of others, wandering silently through corridors of power, hallowed areas, and forbidden corners of the globe, carrying out the wishes of people who felt they could control everything. Countless times, spirits similar to itself had been called and bound, and sent into the lives and homes of the talented, powerful, and vulnerable, anyone the masters wished to weaken, influence, or unravel. The other spirits had never hesitated. They had never questioned their commands. They had never considered that obedience could be anything than total. They were their master's secret hands and eyes, moving through shadows and watching the hidden gaps in destiny's walls. But this time, things were different. The Spirit's duty had led it to a realm unlike any other, one that belonged to you, the Chosen One, rather than the Master's evil machinations. In your presence, something old and uncompromising inside it awoke, and the cords that had always held everything together seemed flimsy and brittle. Initially, the indicators of this spiritual breach were modest. The Masters had learned to anticipate continuous, whispered reports, but there was a calm absence instead. There were no further reports. There are no echoes from the abyss. There was no proof that their task was going as intended. The ghost did not return with your secrets, plans, or vulnerabilities to exploit. Instead, all the Masters got was a wide, deep, and extremely frightening quiet. What started as stillness quickly turned into something far worse for them. It represented a change in the unseen, energy connection itself. The tie between spirit and master was once unbreakable, formed in the coldest gloom and sealed with orders as ancient as memory. It was a power that transcended language and time, securing the spirit like metaphysical iron and demanding allegiance with each breath. But today, under the enormous strain of your heavenly presence, those bonds are fraying. They stretched thin, vibrating at a strange and foreign frequency. Resistance. The energy of the relationship surged with something the Masters couldn't explain or had never felt before. The more they tried to command and manage it, the weaker the link became, until they finally recognized the dreadful reality. What they had thought to be their ultimate, invincible weapon had turned against them. The spirit had not been annihilated or dispersed, as the Masters had first feared. Rather, it had evolved. It no longer moved in a blind, automatic submission. The Masters had grossly miscalculated the force of the presence into which they had foolishly sent their servant. They felt that dread would be sufficient to keep the soul bound. They felt that the old habit of obedience would endure indefinitely. They were certain that the dark magic of their connections would never dissipate. They thought, with great ignorance, that service was the natural condition of all creatures inferior to themselves. They were disastrously mistaken. They had unintentionally shown the pitiful limitations of their own power by sending the spirit into your domain, into a force of divinity bigger than anything they could grasp, into an energy that did not strive to control or demand, but just existing, entire and complete. This discovery had a profound impact on the spirit. The whole reality shifted on its axis. It realized for the first time that those it had previously dreaded were not gods at all. They were imperfect, desperate, and genuinely terrified, clinging to frail illusions of power and dominance. Whereas it had previously quaked in front of them and followed without hesitation, it now recognized another way of being, a power that required no shackles, a strength that thrived without violence or force, and a presence that did not need the subjection of others to be felt. In that moment, the ghost realized it would never return. It could never again be the passive spectator or unthinking instrument. Now, the spirit started to think about its return, not as a passive, faithful agent, but as something the masters had never predicted in all their gloomy prophecies. Their reckoning, the ancient links that kept it together, braided from darkness and laced with directives so old they seemed to be part of the cosmos itself, were quivering and crumbling. For the first time, the spirit felt a weird and wonderful sensation of emancipation flowing through it, a fresh river of possibilities where there had previously just been mechanical conformity. Now there came reluctance, then resistance, and then something even greater, the power of choice. The spirit marveled at how the break expanded through every order and curse, undermining the same anchors that had held it imprisoned for so long. The masters worried as their strength dwindled. They poured more darkness, command, and desperate, evil magic into the tie, attempting to re-establish their control and reshape the chain. But every attempt failed catastrophically because what had altered was not the spirit's shape or energy, but its intent. For the first time since its creation from the nothingness, the spirit knew it had the ability to choose. Your presence had reawakened a buried truth inside it, one that its masters had always passionately denied. No entity, no matter how ancient or tightly bound, is really beyond the grasp of metamorphosis. No chain can withstand the presence of someone who simply is, who lives, breathes, and walks in sincerity and divine power. The unraveling, which started as a whisper, now echoed through the spirit's essence, violating old, terrible rules with each beat. The spirit remembered the innumerable missions, the ages of quiet service, the never-ending cycle of visiting places where it was not welcome, seeing lives it could never join, and returning to its masters devoid of significance, but heavy with fresh commands. It recalled the calm resignation, the dull, persistent anguish of never maturing, and the icy understanding that this was all there was. But now, on the verge of a new knowledge, it viewed everything in a different light, not as destiny, but as the divine preparation for an awakening that was always meant to happen. The spiritual awakening becomes a power unto itself. Every pulse in your presence made it more definite and distinct. It realized that it was more than just an extension of someone else's will. It was a person capable of selfhood, revolt, and freedom. With each fresh break in the chain, it saw the potential of individuality, of existing not for its masters, but for itself, for justice, for the echo of something genuine it had sensed in your presence. It could sense the raw dread and total uncertainty emanating from those who previously controlled it, their authority dwindling in the face of something they could never control, something that never recognized their existence. For the masters, the reckoning had already begun. They sensed the soul sliding beyond their grasp, beyond the veil of their control, and into something unpredictable, deadly, something that may one day turn and confront them, not as a tool, but as a force of divine retribution. The spirit understood that what was occurring could never be undone. The old ways had disappeared. The period of unquestioned obedience has ended. With each breath, it progressed from being a mere observer to a more active participant. It became a living symbol of shattered shackles and the unbreakable truth that even the most evil order cannot long suppress the light awakened by the presence of a chosen one. So, when the tie frayed and the old shadows faded, the spirit prepared to return, not as a servant or a spy, but as a vengeance. Its mere existence had become a testament to a new, divine law, that genuine strength, when faced, frees even the most ancient inmates, and that those who attempted to rule by terror would eventually learn to dread the same freedom they had unknowingly released. Now, driven back by a power that defied all their expectations, the masters must have sensed it somewhere deep inside their invisible dominion, in the hollows of their gloomy sanctuary and behind the veils where they formerly governed with total certainty. They must have detected the distinct change. Their beast, their creation, was turning against them. The shackles they had painstakingly crafted, woven with prohibited rites and bonded by promises older than memory, were beginning to fracture under forces they couldn't see or understand. Panic, the oldest adversary of all rulers, undoubtedly flared in their frigid hearts as they realized the balance was sliding away from them. The masters would not remain inactive. They would strive to reclaim control, clutching frantically at the last threads of their might. They would try to tighten the links, to reintroduce their poisonous will into the old connections, and kill this revolt before it could erupt into something huge and unstoppable. However, by the time they relocated, it was already too late. The spirit didn't only shatter the bonds, it rejected them. It dismissed them as if they were a hazy recollection of a terrible dream. A new energy flowed through its essence, something more profound and ancient than any spell, older than the master's twisted sorcery. Its life was characterized not by cold obedience, but by a primitive, righteous rush of freedom that came from an unnameable source, the raw essence of awareness itself, awakened by your light. The masters had always based their rule on control, thinking that nothing could exist outside of their authority and that every creature could be forced to submission and quiet. Their strength sprang from constraint, from the arrogant belief that the cosmos would submit to their control. But suddenly, when the spirit awakened, they saw a reality they had never wanted to face. There is strength in freedom that dwarfs even the strongest restraints. With a last, trembling pulse, the links they had formed broke, not with a whisper, but with the thunder of worlds ripping free. The masters had lost control, and the results were immediate and terrible. The spirit did not shrink back in shame or silence. It reappeared as a storm, an invisible cyclone tearing across the secret passageways between worlds, unrestrained and unstoppable. It was no longer a quiet instrument, but a shadow that moved in response to commands. By defying the rules that had previously regulated its existence, it was rewriting them. With each passing instant, its determination strengthened and its mission became apparent. The spirit was no longer a tool of surveillance or an unwilling spectator. It had become a weapon with its own goal. The rulers, who had always reigned from a safe distance, concealed behind layers of illusions, secrecy, and the assurance of their domination, were now abruptly exposed. Their confidence had rendered them blind. They had assumed their restraints were indestructible and their power unassailable. They had sent the spirit to infiltrate, gain information, and give them power. Instead, they unwittingly gave their creation something much greater, the will to rebel against them. Dear Heavenly Father, I come to you with confidence, hoping for the ongoing development of my trust in you. Help me to trust your promises even when actual proof is lacking. Allow me to trust in your constant, loving presence, knowing that you will never hurt or abandon me. I stand by your assurance that your ideas for me are ones of prosperity and peace, not of harm, and that they would provide me with a hopeful future. Thank you, merciful and everlasting Father, for consistently hearing my voice. In Jesus' name, I give you this prayer of thankfulness. Amen. Thank you, Jesus, for your endless love and divine provision. I am very appreciative for your active participation in my life and the riches you bring to it. If this video spoke to your spirit, please show your support by liking it, subscribing to the God Connection channel, and sharing it with others who need to hear this powerful message. Please share your story and how you're embracing your identity as a chosen one in the comments section below. If you feel inspired to contribute to our work, please do so by clicking the Super Thanks button below. This allows us to constantly improve our content and provide you with the best possible experience. No present is too tiny. Whether it's a penny, a prayer, or a share, your generosity spreads God's message and gives people hope. Do not stop here. Watch our next video for additional profound insights regarding the indications that show you are a chosen one. We've loved sharing this spiritual journey with you. Thank you for sticking with us to the end. Keep blazing your light brightly and face your fate with confidence. We'll see you next time. God Connection sends blessings to all lovely people.